Hong Kong is in an uproar. India and China fight over a disputed border. And Taiwan gets rejected by the World Health Organization. Again. This is China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. In recent episodes, we've talked about how the Chinese Communist Party has been escalating its crackdown on Hong Kong since the coronavirus outbreak began. And now, Beijing is taking a huge step to bring Hong Kong directly under its control, with a new national security law for Hong Kong. The law will ban secession, subversion of state power, foreign interference, and terrorism, which means that this will now be illegal. Also this, and especially this. Okay, some of those things were already illegal under Hong Kong law, but now they'll be even more illegal. The Hong Kong government previously tried to pass a national security law back in 2003 called Article 23. But the government backed down after 500,000 people protested, which just shows you the problem with having a government that is even partially elected by the citizens. It's like they think they have to listen to the people who elected them or something. The same thing happened with the extradition bill the Hong Kong government tried to pass last year. They eventually backed down after 2 million people marched in the streets. So that's a problem. But the Chinese Communist Party has the solution. If the Hong Kong government can't be trusted to pass a national security law themselves, Beijing will just do it for them. This week was the start of China's annual meeting of the National People's Congress, or NPC. It's essentially a rubber stamp Congress. In other words, they're a bunch of NPCs. And in a last-minute bombshell announcement, the NPC said they would look at establishing and enhancing the legal framework and enforcement mechanisms for safeguarding national security in Hong Kong. In other words, Beijing is trying to get more control. According to Chinese state-run media, the NPC could then pass Hong Kong's national security law within half a year or even sooner. If the NPC does pass a law, then Beijing could just force the Hong Kong government to accept it without it having to go through Hong Kong's legislature. Not that things are going very well in Hong Kong's legislature right now. Earlier this week, pro-democracy lawmakers were physically hauled out of LegCo for the second time this month. The pro-Beijing lawmakers were trying to push through a national anthem law that would make it illegal to disrespect the Chinese Communist national anthem. Violators would face big fines or 3 years in jail. And if it still isn't abundantly clear what the Chinese Communist Party is doing in Hong Kong, check this out. The Hong Kong government has extended its coronavirus lockdown through June 4th, which just so happens to be the anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre. The continued lockdown is for public health and safety, no other reason.
When the government, Carrie Lam, said that the whole ban of gathering regulation will go to June 4th, then it's quite obvious what they are up to. For 3 decades of candlelight vigil in Hong Kong. And now they are banning it this year. So what they tell us about one country, two system? So they are trying to tell the world they don't care about one country, two system anymore. They are blatantly trying to suppress the freedom of people of Hong Kong.
I don't know. How blatant is it, really? Is it blatant to sentence a Hong Kong protester to 4 years in jail for, quote, rioting? Is it blatant for the Hong Kong public broadcaster to shut down a satire show for criticizing police? Speaking of Hong Kong police, the police watchdog declared Hong Kong police did nothing wrong in protests last year, though it does admit there was room for improvement. Yes, let's look at their actions during protests last year. Is that blatant? One of the Hong Kong protesters' 5 demands was to set up an independent investigation committee to look into police brutality. That's because the IPCC, the Independent Police Complaints Council, is not actually independent. I know. Imagine having independent in your name and not really being independent. It almost sounds like it was a lie. But of course, Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam has said there's no need for a truly independent investigation.
With regards to the Independent Commission of Inquiry, I have addressed it many times. The position of the government has never changed. Our position is simply that we do not agree there is a need to set up a separate independent inquiry to investigate the police.
Blatant? Now, here's the funny thing about what's happening in Hong Kong. The Chinese Communist Party has been suggesting that Hong Kong's one country, two systems policy is also a great option for Taiwan. That is, Taiwan could become a part of the People's Republic of China either by A, a military invasion, or B, voluntarily joining up with the one country, two systems policy. And just like Hong Kong, Taiwan would get to keep its freedoms. Right. But Taiwan's democratically re-elected president made it very clear what she thinks about the one country, two systems deal in her recent inauguration address.
We will not accept the Beijing authorities' use of one country, two systems to downgrade Taiwan and undermine the cross-strait status quo. We stand fast by this principle.
Which then, I guess, leaves only option A, military invasion, which the Chinese Communist Party is already preparing for. Look, after all that Hong Kong news, I need something less depressing to talk about. So, here's President Tsai Ing-wen with one of her cats. Meanwhile, the U.S. State Department is monitoring whether Hong Kong still has autonomy. That's under the new Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act. But earlier this month, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said they were delaying their report.
Right now, we're delaying our report to Congress that will assess Hong Kong's autonomy to allow us to account for any additional actions that Beijing may be contemplating in the run-up to the National People's Congress that would further undermine the people of Hong Kong's autonomy as promised by China.
Well, delaying the report until after the NPC turned out to be a good idea. Of course, the Chinese Communist Party is now accusing the U.S. of blackmailing Hong Kong. Right now is a scary time for the people of Hong Kong. Under the security laws that are already in place in mainland China, you can be punished for anything from protesting the government to just criticizing the government on social media. If similar laws are forced on Hong Kong, then Hong Kongers will lose the freedoms promised under one country, two systems. Ahead of the British handover, the Chinese Communist Party had promised Hong Kong it could keep all its freedoms until the year 2047. Now it seems like the party is taking away Hong Kong's freedoms 27 years earlier than they promised. But from the party's perspective, they're just doing it 27 years ahead of schedule. Communist systems sure are efficient. And coming up after the break, Indian and Chinese soldiers fight at the border. Welcome back to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. While the world is kind of distracted by this whole coronavirus pandemic, the Chinese Communist Party has started pushing the envelope in several territorial disputes with neighbors in the South China Sea, with Taiwan, with Japan, and now with India. On May 10th, Chinese and Indian troops clashed here in North Sikkim. It was a 150-person brawl with soldiers fighting and throwing rocks. 11 soldiers were injured. Why? Because they were throwing rocks at each other. I didn't even know adults did that. But that was actually the second incident that happened between Chinese and Indian troops in less than a week. On the night of May 5th, 250 soldiers clashed in eastern Ladakh near Pangong Lake. So at least 400 Chinese and Indian soldiers have been involved in two separate skirmishes this month. These kinds of physical disputes between Indian and Chinese soldiers happen more often than you might think. China and India actually fought a full-on war over territory back in 1962. Now, both sides have chosen to substantially reinforce the deployment of armed forces for the time being. This may remind you of a similar border conflict that happened back in 2017, when PLA troops harassed Indian ones near the disputed border.
Its personnel were caught on camera jostling with Indian troops, sometime in second week of June across the ILAC in Sikkim.
That resulted in a months-long conflict, but this time, both sides are trying to downplay the dispute. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian said China and India stay in close communication and coordination concerning our border affairs within existing channels. Meanwhile, one of India's top generals said, as far as the situation in the northern border is concerned, I will not call it skirmishes, I would rather say it is face-offs, and these face-offs have been happening in the past also. Nothing new about it. Yes, India and China are involved in a face-off. The Chinese Communist Party is trying to box India in. They control a port in Sri Lanka that could one day become a naval base. They're also helping India's rival Pakistan build another port that could also one day become a naval base. And they've been trying to interfere politically in several countries that border India: Nepal, Bhutan, and Myanmar. And judging by how aggressive the Chinese regime is getting with all of its neighbors, why is this latest border spat being treated as nothing of concern? Well, it could be because India is still deciding if it wants to align with China or the US. India has bargaining power with both countries. And now, there's an unexpected bargaining chip: Taiwan. India, which is set to take over as the next chairperson of the World Health Organization's decision-making executive body in May, is faced with a major choice on whether to support a US move to reinstate Taiwan's observer status at the World Health Assembly, or to China's opposition to it. And China's little incursion across the disputed border could be a gentle reminder to India that China has a military that's willing to fight. You know, just in case India decides to support Taiwan. Or it could just have been that some Chinese soldiers started throwing rocks. But if India feels like it has to make a choice between China and the United States, the choice is obvious, I hope. One shares India's democratic values. The other is an authoritarian regime known for a history of breaking promises. India shouldn't have to settle for a status quo where regular face-offs are nothing new. Speaking of which, since these latest face-offs, Chinese helicopters have been spotted flying along the border, and Indian fighter jets have now been deployed to the border as well. Something tells me I should save this graphic for future use. And stay tuned after the break. Taiwan has done a great job fighting the CCP virus, but the World Health Organization doesn't want to hear about it, unless it's from Taiwan province of China. Welcome back to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. This week, the World Health Organization held an online meeting of member nations. It's called the World Health Assembly, and the main topic was how to tackle the coronavirus. However, Taiwan was not invited. Why? Isn't Taiwan, part of the world? Aren't they also dealing with the coronavirus? In fact, haven't they been the most successful at fighting it? Taiwan has a population of 23 million, but only 440 coronavirus cases and 7 deaths. Taiwan was also asking the WHO to vote on whether they could be an observer at all WHO meetings, something they had been allowed to do until 2016. But in the end, they decided to postpone their request. But shouldn't Taiwan have at least been at this WHO meeting about the coronavirus that Taiwan has been so successful at controlling? No, of course not. I'll get to the reason in a moment. But here's some important background information you need to know. This is YouTube CEO Susan Wojcicki on CNN's Reliable Sources in April.
But then we also talk about removing information that is problematic. Anything that would go against World Health Organization recommendations would be a violation of our policy.
Apparently, violations of YouTube's policy included our episode, Coronavirus, How WHO Corruption Helped It Spread. Yes, over the weekend, YouTube censored that episode, completely removing it, after it had been up for almost 3 months. In the episode, I referenced things like this AP article about how the WHO spends more on first-class travel and 5-star hotels than on fighting AIDS, and how an internal audit found that the division of the WHO responsible for handling the coronavirus outbreak is so chronically underfunded, it has repeatedly been found to pose a severe and unacceptable level of hazard. Now, at no point in this video did we actually go against World Health Organization recommendations, unless you count chronically underfunding your Health Emergencies Response Division while your leadership stays in 5-star hotels as a recommendation. Actually, the reason YouTube gave for removing the video was because it encourages or promotes violent or dangerous acts. Yep. Now, after we appealed the decision and made a big stink about it on social media, YouTube put the video back online in just an hour. But this experience, it really got me thinking. As a YouTube content creator, I need to be more responsible to you, my viewers, when it comes to talking about the WHO. Thank you for pointing this out to me, Susan. Which is why I've decided to praise the WHO for excluding Taiwan from their meeting. That's a good decision, one that really advances global health. And really, it's Taiwan's own fault for being excluded. They rejected China's main condition for entry, which was acceptance that Taiwan is part of China. I mean, it is. That's just objective reality if you look at maps created by China. Or read confidential internal memos from the WHO that instruct everyone to always say the Taiwan province of China. Yes, the World Health Organization always lists Taiwan as a province of China. They call it Taipei, the capital of Taiwan, and environs in a list of affected cities in China. And who am I to argue with Susan Wojcicki? I mean the WHO. I respect their recommendations on all matters. Now, the US was really pushing hard for Taiwan province of China to attend the WHO meeting. But come on, how many people has the US killed in the Middle East, which is very relevant to this issue? And anyway, it's not as if Taiwan province of China wasn't represented at the WHO meeting. Xi Jinping was there to represent all the provinces of China. He even gave a speech where he promised $2 billion to help fight the coronavirus. Wow, so generous with money. I can see why the World Health Organization has praised China for their transparent response to the coronavirus.
China took action massively at the epicenter, at the source of the outbreak. This is heroic. The actions of China is making us safer.
And I certainly wouldn't want to put a video on YouTube where I disagree with the head of the WHO. I wouldn't do that, Susan. And yet, Trump has been attacking the World Health Organization, and he's totally alone. He's saying the WHO's response to the coronavirus was too slow. That's Trump saying that, not me. I wouldn't do that, Susan. Trump is also now threatening to permanently cut U.S. funding to the WHO and possibly withdraw the U.S. from the WHO entirely. In a letter to the head of the WHO, Dr. Tedros, Trump writes,
"If the World Health Organization does not commit to major substantive improvements over the next 30 days, I will make my temporary freeze of United States funding to the World Health Organization permanent and reconsider our membership in the organization."
That seems kind of unfair to the WHO. I mean, sure, they've been very careful to never contradict China when it comes to the coronavirus outbreak. But is that really so bad? I mean, China is now even in favor of a coronavirus investigation. As long as it's done after the pandemic is over, and as long as the investigation is about no country in particular. I'm fine with it. So remember, everyone, be like Dr. Tedros and follow the WHO guidelines. Maintain at least 3 feet of distance between yourself and others. If you need to leave your house, wear a mask. And avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. And definitely, ignore the president of Taiwan Province, China. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.